Sometimes the most extraordinary people walk among us in the most ordinary disguise. They sit next to us on buses, stand behind us in grocery store lines, and, yes, they even get laughed at in gun shops by people who have no idea they're mocking a hero. Sarah Martinez learned this lesson the hard way on a cold Tuesday morning in downtown Phoenix. What started as a simple errand to purchase her first firearm for home protection turned into a humiliating experience that would have broken most people. But Sarah wasn't most people. She carried secrets that would make grown men tremble, bore scars that told stories of courage most could never imagine, and possessed skills that had saved countless lives in the darkest corners of the world. The three young men behind the gun shop counter saw only what they wanted to see: a petite woman in her 30s, wearing simple clothes and speaking softly. They saw someone they could intimidate, someone they could mock, someone they could dismiss. They had no idea they were about to learn the most important lesson of their lives about respect, assumptions, and what real strength looks like. This is the true story of how one woman's quiet dignity in the face of humiliation led to a moment that would change everyone in that gun shop forever. It's a story about hidden heroes, about the danger of judging people by their appearance, and about how sometimes the universe has a perfect way of teaching bullies exactly who they're dealing with. Sarah Martinez pulled her modest Honda Civic into the parking lot of Phoenix Arms and Supply, her hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The morning sun cast long shadows across the asphalt, and she could see through the large front windows of the gun shop that it was already busy with customers. She took a deep breath, checked her appearance in the rearview mirror one more time, and stepped out of her car. At 34, Sarah had learned to blend into crowds. Her shoulder-length brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore dark jeans with a plain blue sweater. Nothing about her appearance suggested the extraordinary life she had lived or the secrets she carried. To anyone watching, she looked like what she was trying to be: an ordinary woman running an ordinary errand on an ordinary Tuesday morning. But ordinary was exactly what Sarah Martinez was not. Hidden beneath her unremarkable exterior was a woman who had spent 8 years as a decorated Army Special Forces operative, one of the first women to successfully complete the grueling training program. She had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, led rescue missions in hostile territory, and earned commendations for valor that few people would ever see. The small scar above her left eyebrow came from shrapnel during a firefight outside Kandahar. The way she unconsciously scanned the parking lot for threats was a habit developed from years of staying alive in the world's most dangerous places. 6 months ago, Sarah had returned to civilian life, settling in Phoenix to be closer to her aging mother. She had taken a quiet job as a security consultant for a small tech company, work that paid the bills but felt almost insultingly simple after the intensity of her military career. She lived in a modest apartment, drove a reliable car, and was trying very hard to build something resembling a normal life. The decision to purchase a firearm for home protection had not been made lightly. Sarah owned plenty of weapons during her military service, but civilian ownership felt different somehow. She had researched gun shops in the area extensively, reading reviews and checking credentials. Phoenix Arms and Supply had good ratings and a reputation for knowledgeable staff, which was important to Sarah. She wanted to make an informed purchase from people who understood firearms, not just sell them. As she approached the shop's entrance, Sarah noticed 3 young men through the window, all wearing the shop's polo shirts with embroidered logos. They appeared to be employees, probably in their early 20s, and they were laughing loudly about something. The oldest of the 3, a tall kid with bleached hair and multiple tattoos covering his arms, seemed to be the ringleader of whatever joke they were sharing. The bell above the door chimed as Sarah entered, and the smell of gun oil and leather hit her immediately. The shop was larger than it appeared from outside, with display cases running along both walls filled with handguns, rifles, and accessories. Several customers browsed quietly, including an older man examining a hunting rifle and a middle-aged couple looking at small pistols suitable for concealed carry. Sarah made her way to the handgun section, taking her time to examine the options. She'd done her research and had a good idea of what she wanted, but she believed in being thorough. Her military training had taught her that the right equipment could mean the difference between life and death, and old habits died hard. Behind the counter, she could hear the three employees continuing their conversation, though their voices had dropped slightly when she entered. The tall one with bleached hair was talking about a party from the weekend, describing in crude detail his romantic encounters. The second employee, shorter with a thin mustache, was discussing his plans to buy a motorcycle. The third, barely old enough to work in a gun shop, was mostly listening and tried to impress his older coworkers with occasional crude comments. After 15 minutes of examining different options, Sarah approached the counter. She had decided on a Glock 19, a reliable and versatile pistol that would serve her needs well. It was a gun she was familiar with from her military service, though she had primarily carried different weapons during her deployments. The tall employee with bleached hair noticed her approach and nudged his coworkers. "Looks like we got a customer, boys," he said with a smirk that immediately set Sarah on edge. There was something in his tone that suggested this was going to be more complicated than a simple purchase. "Hi," Sarah said politely, maintaining her calm demeanor despite the employee's attitude. "I'm interested in purchasing a Glock 19. I've done my research, but I'd like to handle it before making a final decision." The employee, whose name tag read Brad, looked her up and down with obvious skepticism. "A Glock 19?" he repeated, as if she had just asked for a rocket launcher. "That's a pretty serious weapon. You sure you know what you're getting into?" Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same feeling she had experienced countless times when people underestimated her because of her appearance. In the military, she had proven herself over and over again, but in civilian life, she was starting from scratch every time she met someone new. "I'm quite sure," she replied evenly. "I've researched the specifications, and it meets my needs for home defense." Brad exchanged glances with his coworkers, who had moved closer to observe the interaction. "Home defense, huh?" he said with a condescending chuckle. "Look, lady, the Glock 19 isn't exactly a beginner's gun. It's got some kick to it. Maybe you'd be more comfortable with something smaller, like a .22? We've got some nice little pink ones that might be more your speed." The comment about pink guns struck Sarah like a physical blow, but she maintained her composure. She had dealt with sexism throughout her military career, and, while it still stung, she had learned to handle it professionally. "I appreciate your concern," she said, her voice remaining steady, "but I'm confident in my choice. Could I please see the Glock 19? Brad shrugged and pulled out a box from behind the counter, but his movements were deliberately slow and theatrical. "It's your funeral," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Though I guess if you can't handle it, you'll just end up shooting holes in your own wall." His two co-workers snickered at this comment, and Sarah noticed that other customers in the shop were beginning to pay attention to the interaction. The older man examining the hunting rifle had stopped what he was doing and was watching with obvious interest. The middle-aged couple had moved closer, clearly uncomfortable with the employee's behavior, but uncertain whether to intervene. Sarah accepted the unloaded Glock from Brad and began examining it with the practiced eye of someone who had handled thousands of firearms. She checked the weight and balance, tested the trigger pull, examined the sights, and inspected the overall condition. Her movements were confident and professional, the result of years of training and experience. "Oh, look at her," Brad said to his coworkers in a stage whisper. "She thinks she knows what she's doing, but she learned everything from watching cop shows on TV." The employee with the thin mustache, whose name tag read Tyler, joined in the mockery. "Maybe she's going to be the next Lara Croft," he said with a laugh, "though I don't think she's got the right outfit for it." The youngest employee, Kevin, according to his name tag, seemed less comfortable with the direction the conversation was taking, but he still managed a nervous laugh. "Maybe she should start with a water gun," he suggested weakly, clearly trying to impress his older coworkers. Sarah continued her examination of the firearm, professionally ignoring the comments. She had dealt with worse harassment in combat zones, and she was not about to let three punk kids in a gun shop get under her skin. But she could feel her jaw clenching and had to consciously relax her facial muscles. "You know what?" Brad continued, emboldened by his coworkers' laughter and what he perceived as Sarah's lack of response. "I bet she can't even load it properly. Hey, lady, You want me to show you which end the bullets come out of? This comment drew more laughter from Tyler and Kevin, and Sarah noticed that several other customers were now openly staring. The older man with the hunting rifle looked disgusted with the employee's behavior, and the middle-aged couple appeared ready to leave. The atmosphere in the shop had become tense and uncomfortable. Sarah finished her examination of the Glock and set it down on the counter carefully. "The weapon appears to be in excellent condition," she said calmly. "I'd like to proceed with the purchase. I assume you need to see my identification and have me fill out the required federal forms." Brad picked up the gun and made an exaggerated show of checking it himself. "Well, I guess if you're really sure you can handle it," he said with mock concern. "Though I have to warn you, this isn't like those video games. Real guns are loud and scary. You might want to bring your boyfriend along next time to help you out." "I don't have a boyfriend," Sarah replied simply, "and I won't need help." "Oh, she's tough," Tyler said with exaggerated fear. "Better watch out, Brad. She might karate chop you or something." The mockery continued as Sarah began filling out the required federal paperwork for the gun purchase. Every few minutes, one of the employees would make another condescending comment about her ability to handle a firearm, her appearance, or women in general. They seemed to be feeding off each other's energy, each trying to be funnier and more cutting than the last. Other customers in the shop began to leave, clearly uncomfortable with the hostile atmosphere the employees were creating. The older man with the hunting rifle shook his head in disgust and walked out without making a purchase. The middle-aged couple followed shortly after, the woman whispering something to her husband about finding another shop. Sarah noticed the exodus of customers, but continued methodically filling out her paperwork. She provided her identification, answered all the required questions, and maintained her professional demeanor throughout the process. Inside, however, she was wrestling with a familiar mixture of anger and disappointment. She had hoped that civilian life would be different, that she could escape the constant need to prove herself that had characterized her military career. As she worked through the paperwork, Sarah found herself thinking about her time in Afghanistan. She remembered leading a rescue mission to extract a kidnapped diplomat from a Taliban compound, rappelling from a helicopter under enemy fire while these three idiots were probably still in high school. She thought about the Bronze Star with Valor device hidden in a box in her closet, awarded for actions during a firefight that saved the lives of 6 fellow soldiers. But none of that mattered here. In this gun shop, she was just another woman for these boys to mock and belittle. "You know," Brad said, leaning against the counter while she filled out forms, "most women who come in here end up changing their minds. They realize that guns aren't toys and decide to stick with pepper spray. You sure you don't want to reconsider? We've got some nice bright pink pepper spray that would match your personality." Sarah looked up from the paperwork and met Brad's eyes directly. For just a moment, he caught a glimpse of something that made him slightly uncomfortable, though he couldn't identify exactly what it was. There was a steeliness in her gaze that seemed inconsistent with the quiet woman he had been mocking for the past 20 minutes. "I'm quite sure," Sarah said simply, then returned to her paperwork. The bell above the shop door chimed again, but this time Sarah didn't look up to see who had entered. She was focused on completing her purchase and leaving this place as quickly as possible. The experience had been every bit as humiliating as she had feared, and she was already planning to recommend that her friends avoid Phoenix Arms and Supply. Behind her, she heard the new customer speaking quietly to one of the employees, asking about rifle scopes. The voice sounded older, more authoritative than the 3 young men who had been tormenting her. But Sarah didn't pay much attention. She was almost finished with her paperwork, and soon this whole ordeal would be behind her. What she didn't notice was that the new customer had overheard some of the employees' comments and was watching the interaction with growing interest and concern. What she couldn't have known was that her ordeal was about to take a very different turn, one that would transform this humiliating experience into something extraordinary. As Sarah signed the final form and prepared to complete her purchase, she had no idea that the next few minutes would change everything, not just for her, but for everyone in that gun shop. Sometimes the universe has a perfect sense of timing, and this was about to be one of those moments. The man who had entered Phoenix Arms and Supply moved with the distinctive bearing of someone accustomed to command. Colonel James Richardson, even in civilian clothes, carried himself with the unmistakable posture of a career military officer. At 52, he had spent nearly 30 years in the Army, the last 8 as commanding officer of the 75th Ranger Regiment at Fort Benning, Georgia. He was in Phoenix for a military conference and had stopped by the gun shop to browse their selection of rifle scopes. Colonel Richardson had initially focused on the display case containing optical equipment, but the crude laughter and mocking comments from the 3 employees had gradually drawn his attention. As someone who had dedicated his life to military service and had enormous respect for anyone who chose to serve, the disrespectful behavior toward what appeared to be a female customer troubled him deeply. From his position near the scope display, Richardson could only catch fragments of the conversation, but what he heard made his jaw tighten with anger. The employees seemed to be systematically mocking and belittling a woman who was simply trying to make a purchase. Their comments about her appearance, their suggestions about pink guns, and their general attitude reminded him of the worst kind of sexism he had worked to eliminate from military culture throughout his career. Richardson moved closer, pretending to examine a rifle while actually observing the interaction more closely. He could see the woman at the counter now, a petite brunette who appeared to be in her 30s. She was handling the mockery with remarkable composure, maintaining her dignity despite the increasingly crude comments from the 3 young employees. There was something about her bearing, something in the way she handled the firearm she was examining, that caught his professional attention. "You sure you don't want to bring your daddy along to help you shoot it?" Brad was saying with a laugh that made Richardson's fists clench involuntarily. "Or maybe we could give you some training wheels for it." The woman continued filling out her paperwork without responding to the taunt, but Richardson noticed the slight tightening around her eyes. He had seen that expression before, usually on the faces of young soldiers who were being hazed but were determined not to give their tormentors the satisfaction of a reaction. It was the look of someone with significant inner strength who was choosing restraint over retaliation. Tyler, apparently emboldened by his co-worker's success in drawing laughs, decided to escalate. "Hey, Brad, maybe she's one of those feminist types who thinks women can do everything men can do. You know, like in the movies where the 90-pound actress beats up the 200-pound bad guys." "Oh yeah," Kevin chimed in, still trying to impress his older co-workers. "She probably thinks she's going to be some kind of action hero. Next thing you know, she'll be applying to be a Navy SEAL or something." The laughter that followed this comment made Richardson's blood boil. As someone who had worked closely with some of the first women to serve in combat roles, he knew firsthand the courage and capability these women possessed. The idea that these 3 civilian kids were mocking the very concept of women in combat made him want to intervene immediately. But something stopped him. There was still something about the woman's demeanor that didn't quite add up. The way she had examined the Glock earlier had been too professional, too knowledgeable. Her posture, despite her obvious effort to appear non-threatening, had subtle indicators that suggested someone with extensive training. Richardson had spent enough time around military personnel to recognize the signs, even when someone was trying to hide them. Sarah finished the last of her paperwork and slid it across the counter to Brad. "Everything should be in order," she said quietly. "When can I expect the background check to be completed?" Brad made a show of examining her forms with exaggerated thoroughness. "Well, let's see here," he said slowly. "Sarah Martinez. That's interesting. You sure you're not here illegally? Because I don't want to sell a gun to someone who's going to smuggle it across the border." The racist comment hit Sarah like a physical blow, and Richardson saw her entire body stiffen. This had crossed a line from sexist mockery into something much more serious, and Richardson was about to step forward when he noticed something else. The woman's hands, which had been resting calmly on the counter, had unconsciously shifted into a position that Richardson recognized as a defensive combat stance. Without even thinking about it, she had positioned herself to react to a threat. "I was born in San Antonio, Texas," Sarah said, her voice remaining steady despite the obvious effort it was costing her. "I'm a United States citizen, and my identification and paperwork are all in order." "Oh, San Antonio," Tyler said with a sneer. "That explains a lot. You probably came up here to get away from all the gangs and drugs down there, right? Thought you'd need some protection in the big city." Sarah's composure was beginning to crack, and Richardson could see it. The casual racism and continued mockery were taking their toll, and he could see her struggling to maintain the calm demeanor she had shown throughout the ordeal. But there was something else he noticed, something that made him look more closely at her face. There was a small scar above her left eyebrow, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. Richardson had seen similar scars on combat veterans, usually from shrapnel or debris during firefights. Combined with her professional handling of the firearm and her unconscious tactical positioning, it was starting to paint a picture that these three idiots had no idea they were creating. You know what I think? Brad continued, apparently oblivious to the fact that he was walking into dangerous territory. I think you're one of those wannabe tough girls who watches too many action movies, but you've never even seen real violence. Bet you'd run crying at the first sign of trouble. That comment finally broke through Sarah's carefully maintained composure. She looked up from the counter and met Brad's eyes directly, and Richardson saw something that confirmed his suspicions. For just a moment, the mask slipped, and he caught a glimpse of the steel beneath. It was the look of someone who had seen real combat, real violence, and had survived things that would break most people. You'd be surprised, Sarah said quietly, but there was something in her tone that made even Brad pause for a moment. Richardson decided it was time to get a closer look. He approached the counter area, ostensibly to ask about rifle scopes, but actually to position himself where he could better observe the interaction. As he moved closer, he got a better look at Sarah's face and posture, and several more pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The way she held her shoulders suggested someone accustomed to carrying heavy packs and equipment. Her eyes constantly scanned the room in a pattern Richardson recognized as threat assessment, the kind of automatic behavior developed through extensive combat training. Most tellingly, when she thought no one was looking, her hand unconsciously went to her left hip, exactly where a military sidearm would be carried. "Excuse me," Richardson said, approaching the counter. "I was wondering if you could help me with some rifle scopes, but I don't want to interrupt if you're busy with this customer." Brad looked annoyed at the interruption, especially since he was clearly enjoying tormenting Sarah. "We'll be done with her in a minute," he said dismissively. "She's just buying a gun she probably can't even load." Richardson nodded politely, but positioned himself where he could continue observing. He was now certain that there was much more to this woman than met the eye, and he was curious to see how this situation would develop. He had dealt with bullies throughout his military career, and these three employees were textbook examples of people who enjoyed picking on those they perceived as weak. Sarah completed her background check paperwork and waited while Brad processed it with deliberate slowness. The entire time, he and his co-workers continued their commentary, making jokes about women drivers, women in general, and what they perceived as Sarah's inadequacy to handle a firearm. "I bet she's going to take it to the range and close her eyes when she shoots," Tyler predicted with a laugh. "That's what most women do. They're too scared to actually aim. Or she'll hold it sideways like in those gangster movies," Kevin added, pleased with his own cleverness. "Because that's definitely how real shooting works." Richardson watched Sarah's reaction to these comments with growing admiration. Despite what was clearly intense provocation, she maintained her composure and dignity. But he could also see that the strain was beginning to show. Her jaw was clenched, and her breathing had become slightly more controlled, the kind of deliberate breathing used to manage stress in high-pressure situations. 20 minutes later, Brad finally completed the background check process. "Well, congratulations," he said with mock enthusiasm. "You passed the background check. I guess the government thinks you're trustworthy enough to own a deadly weapon. Just try not to shoot yourself in the foot, okay?" Sarah accepted the completed paperwork and prepared to complete the transaction. "Thank you," she said simply, refusing to give the employees the satisfaction of a more detailed response to their mockery. As she reached for her wallet to pay for the gun, her jacket shifted slightly, and Richardson caught a glimpse of something that made his eyes widen. On her left wrist was a tattoo that he recognized immediately. It was the distinctive insignia of the U.S. Army Special Forces, and below it, in small letters, he could just make out part of what appeared to be a unit designation. Richardson felt his heart rate increase as the implications of what he was seeing hit him. This woman wasn't just a military veteran. she was Special Forces. The mockery and humiliation she was enduring from these three civilian kids was not just inappropriate. It was being directed at someone who had likely seen more combat and shown more courage than all three of them combined would in their entire lives. But Sarah clearly wanted to keep her military background private, and Richardson respected that decision. Many veterans preferred not to advertise their service, especially those who had served in special operations roles. However, the situation was becoming increasingly uncomfortable, and Richardson was beginning to wonder if he should intervene more directly. The decision was taken out of his hands when Brad, apparently not satisfied with the level of humiliation he had already inflicted, decided to escalate one more time. "You know what?" Brad said as Sarah prepared to pay for her purchase. "I changed my mind. I don't think I'm comfortable selling you this gun after all. I'm not convinced you're mentally stable enough to handle it. Maybe you should come back with a man who can vouch for you." The comment was so outrageous that even Tyler and Kevin looked uncomfortable. But Brad seemed pleased with himself, clearly enjoying the power he felt he had over Sarah. What he didn't realize was that he had just made a serious mistake, one that was about to have consequences he could never have imagined. Sarah set down her wallet and looked at Brad with an expression that made Richardson take a step closer. For the first time since entering the shop, she looked truly angry, and Richardson could see that her considerable self-control was finally reaching its limits. "I've completed all the required paperwork correctly," Sarah said, her voice still controlled but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "My background check was approved. I provided proper identification and payment. You have no legal basis for refusing this sale." Brad shrugged with exaggerated indifference. "It's my shop, and I decide who I'm comfortable selling to. And I'm just not comfortable selling a deadly weapon to some unstable woman who thinks she's tougher than she is." Richardson had heard enough. The blatant sexism, racism, and now the arbitrary refusal to complete a legal sale had crossed every line he could think of. But before he could speak, something happened that would change everything in that gun shop forever. The bell above the door chimed again, and a voice called out from the entrance that made Richardson snap to attention immediately. It was a voice he had heard giving orders in combat zones, a voice that commanded instant respect from anyone who understood military hierarchy. "Richardson, Jim Richardson, is that you?" Richardson turned toward the voice and felt his world shift slightly. Walking through the door was General Patricia Walsh, one of the most decorated officers in the United States Army, and someone Richardson had enormous professional and personal respect for. General Walsh commanded the entire Special Operations Command and was known throughout the military as a tough, brilliant leader who demanded excellence from everyone under her command. But, more importantly, at least for the current situation, General Walsh was looking directly at Sarah Martinez with an expression of pleased surprise that suggested she knew exactly who she was looking at. General Patricia Walsh had not planned to stop at Phoenix Arms and Supply that morning. She was in Phoenix for the same military conference as Colonel Richardson, but she had received an urgent call from her aide about a change in her afternoon schedule and had pulled over to take the call privately. When she noticed the gun shop across the street, she decided to stop in quickly to browse their selection of tactical gear. What she had not expected was to run into both Colonel Richardson and, more surprisingly, one of the most exceptional soldiers she had ever had the privilege to command. "Sergeant Martinez?" General Walsh said, her voice carrying clearly across the gun shop as she approached the counter. "Is that really you?" The effect of the general's words on everyone in the shop was immediate and dramatic. Sarah straightened to attention automatically, her civilian demeanor evaporating as her military training took over. Colonel Richardson felt his suspicions confirmed in the most spectacular way possible, and the three young employees suddenly found themselves in the middle of something they couldn't possibly understand. "General Walsh," Sarah replied, her voice now carrying the crisp, professional tone of a soldier addressing a superior officer. "It's good to see you again, ma'am." Brad, Tyler, and Kevin exchanged confused glances. The quiet woman they had been mocking for the past half hour had suddenly transformed into someone entirely different. Her posture was straighter, her voice was stronger, and there was an authority in her bearing that made them all unconsciously step back slightly. General Walsh approached the counter with a smile that Richardson recognized as the expression she wore when she was particularly pleased about something. As the commanding officer of Special Operations Command, General Walsh had overseen some of the most classified and dangerous missions conducted by American forces, and she had worked personally with the elite soldiers who carried them out. "I was wondering what had happened to you after your discharge," General Walsh said warmly. "I heard you were settling somewhere in the Southwest, but I had no idea you were in Phoenix. How are you adjusting to civilian life?" Sarah relaxed slightly at the general's friendly tone, though she maintained her military bearing. "It's been an adjustment, ma'am, but I'm managing well. I've been working as a security consultant here in Phoenix." "Security consultant," General Walsh repeated with a slight smile. "That seems like it might be a bit quiet for someone with your background. Are you finding it challenging enough?" Behind the counter, Brad was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. He had no idea who this older woman was, but her bearing and the way Sarah was responding to her suggested someone of significant importance. More concerning was the fact that Sarah had transformed from a meek woman he had been mocking into someone who seemed to command respect from this obviously important stranger. "Excuse me," Brad interrupted, trying to reassert control over the situation. "We were in the middle of a transaction here. If you ladies want to catch up, maybe you could do it somewhere else." The moment the words left his mouth, Brad realized he had made a serious mistake. General Walsh turned to look at him with an expression that could have frozen lava. Colonel Richardson, who had been observing quietly, stepped forward with a look of barely controlled anger. And Sarah's face showed the first sign of real emotion since the general had arrived. "I beg your pardon?" General Walsh said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that had commanded respect in war zones around the world. "Did you just tell me to take my conversation somewhere else?" Brad swallowed hard, suddenly realizing he might be in over his head. "I just meant that we're trying to run a business here, and this customer was causing some problems." "Problems?" Colonel Richardson spoke for the first time since the general had arrived, and his voice carried decades of command authority. What kind of problems could Sergeant Martinez possibly be causing? The use of Sarah's military rank hit Brad like a physical blow. Tyler and Kevin looked as if they wanted to disappear entirely. They were beginning to understand that the woman they had been mocking was not what she had appeared to be, and the two newcomers were clearly people of significant importance and authority. General Walsh looked at Richardson with recognition and pleasure. "Jim, I thought that was you. I should have known you'd be here for the conference, too." She then turned back to the three employees, her expression becoming considerably less friendly. "Now, what's this about problems with Sergeant Martinez?" Sarah cleared her throat diplomatically. "General, it's really not necessary to—" "Sergeant," General Walsh said firmly, "I asked these gentlemen a question. What problems were you allegedly causing?" Brad looked desperately at his two co-workers for support, but they were both staring at the floor. The confidence and arrogance that had characterized his behavior for the past hour had completely evaporated. "Well, we were just trying to help her find something appropriate." "Appropriate?" Colonel Richardson repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "What exactly did you find inappropriate about Sergeant Martinez's choice in firearms?" Tyler finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "We just thought maybe the Glock 19 might be too much gun for her." The silence that followed this comment was deafening. General Walsh and Colonel Richardson exchanged a look that spoke volumes, and Sarah closed her eyes briefly, as if trying to maintain her composure. "Too much gun," General Walsh repeated slowly, as if she couldn't quite believe what she had heard. "For Sergeant Martinez. You thought a Glock 19 was too much gun for Sergeant Martinez." She turned to Richardson with an expression of disbelief. "Jim, are you hearing this? They thought a Glock 19 was too much gun for the woman who single-handedly extracted 6 hostages from a Taliban compound using nothing but a sidearm and a knife." Brad felt his stomach drop. "Hostages," he managed to croak. General Walsh was just getting started. "Oh yes, that's just one of her accomplishments. Should I tell them about the Bronze Star, Jim? Or maybe the Purple Heart? Perhaps they'd be interested in hearing about the time she held off an entire insurgent squad for 40 minutes while calling in air support to protect a wounded convoy." Colonel Richardson nodded grimly. Or we could discuss her marksmanship scores. Though I suppose that might be embarrassing for these gentlemen, given that she consistently outshot 90% of the male soldiers in her unit. Kevin, who had been the quietest of the three tormentors, looked as if he might be sick. She's really in the Army? He asked weakly. Was in the Army, General Walsh corrected. Sergeant Martinez completed 8 years of distinguished service, including 3 combat deployments. She was one of the first women to complete Special Forces training and one of the most decorated soldiers I've ever had the privilege to command. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, clearly not enjoying being the center of attention. General, please. What's done is done. I just want to complete my purchase and leave. But General Walsh was not ready to let the matter drop. Oh no, Sergeant. These gentlemen need to understand exactly who they've been treating so disrespectfully. Jim, would you like to tell them about the commendation she received for the Kandahar operation? Richardson smiled grimly. The one where she led a rescue mission behind enemy lines to extract a kidnapped diplomat? The mission where she rappelled from a helicopter under heavy fire and fought her way through an entire compound to reach the hostage? That commendation, that's the one, General Walsh confirmed. Though we should probably also mention the time she disarmed an improvised explosive device while under sniper fire, or the occasion when she carried a wounded comrade 2 miles through hostile territory to reach medical evacuation. With each revelation, the